Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the November meeting of the Audit and Accounts Committee. My name's Councillor Steve Willoughby, and I have the privilege of chairing this committee meeting. And just to say that for the benefit of people listening in, the councillors on the call are the members of the committee are Councillor Adrian Pegg. We have Dr. Stuart Green, who's one of the two independent members of the committee. We have Councillor Hardiel Dinser, Councillor Lucy Kerr, Councillor Paul Bettany, the other independent member, Mr. Philip Sunderland. We have Councillor Ross McChrystal, Councillor Shiraz Khan, and of course myself, Councillor Willoughby. And there's various council officers who are in attendance as well, but we'll introduce them as we come to their items on the agenda. Just to say to all the committee members, as seems to be normal practice at these meetings now, that if you want to ask a question, if you just put it in the chat of the Skype meeting, and I'll obviously call people as we go in accordance with the various orders. So first of all, do we have any apologies?
Chair, I've got apologies from Councillor West.
Thanks very much. No others then. So let's move on. That there's no item 2. There were no late items to be introduced by myself. So the second one there, are there any declarations of interest at all? No declarations of interest. Thank you very much. And just to remind everybody of the message that Simon Riley's put in, to please mute yourself when you're not speaking as well. So just remind everybody to do that. So there's no declarations of interest. So let's go on to item, just to say that we're still having problems getting the external auditors in. So in order for us to start on time, what we're going to do is we're going to take some of the other items on the agenda. So I'm going to take item 13 first, while the council officers are trying to dial in the external auditors, just to mention to to everybody on the committee. So if we go now to item 4, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held at the end of September. So if we just go through page by page, if anybody's got any comments, is everybody okay with page 1? Page 2, no comments on that. Page 3, page 4, page 5, and page 6. So no comments. Just to say, some of those bold items there, which are the various resolutions, we capture those under item 5 anyway, so we can deal with anything as part of that.
Chair, I think Philip's indicating he wishes to speak on page 6.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, brilliant, Philip. Do you want to come in then? Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Chair. Just to comment about the Redmond review, I tuned into a webinar which he gave when he presented it, and he went into some detail about what the review came up with. He also subsequently commented that a number of the recommendations were not dependent on legislation, and quite clearly they a number of obviously are dependent on legislation. I just wondered if it might be useful if the council reviewed the recommendations he's got, because there are a number of them which we already have in place. For instance, we do have independent members on the committee. The committee does produce an annual report, and I'm guessing that the key audit partner does have regular meetings with the Section 151 officer. So, I mean, there are a number of recommendations which he did come up with, which I suggest we already have in place. It might be worth a quick review of the recommendation to see what we've got in place, to see what we don't have in place, if there are any which we could introduce to demonstrate that we are acting as efficiently and up to date as we can be. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I agree. That's a good point, actually. I mean, I was on the same webinar. I think it was the day or so after the last committee meeting, I think, wasn't it? I joined that as well, and I think it worked quite well, I thought, the whole process. So yes, it was, and it was useful listening to him, and certainly, listening to some of the questions and asking some of the questions. So yeah, I think that's a good point. I think we should take that, make a note of that, and take that forward. Brilliant, thank you. So brilliant, and just to say now as well, so if there's nothing else on the minutes, we'll go on to item 5, and we can actually now just go through the agenda as planned, because it seems that external auditors Ernst & Young, Stephen Clark from there, now appears to be on the call. So I hope you're hearing us loud and clear, Steve, and can talk at your relevant points. So if you go on to item 5 now, which is the outstanding resolutions, and that's yourself, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the key thing here is that the report is getting quite long now, and one of the recommendations is around how the committee treats those areas that are completed and whether they need to be greyed out. So, but I will go through as it is at the moment. If we look at the meeting from the 5th of February on the internal audit progress report, the acting head of democracy came to the September meeting and updated you with where things are at with the coroner's service. So, and he will continue to do that as required. The Sinfin waste plant in the assembly rooms is dealt with in that document there. We've got ongoing meetings with the lead officer on Sinfin, and we continue to monitor what's happening around the performance venue. When the new performance venue comes on, we'll add that into the audit work that we do. Item 6, we've got we should be receiving an update on the shared lives audit. Unfortunately, Sharon was on the call, but she's having a few technical problems and has dropped off at the moment, so she's not available to provide that at the moment. She's listed there. I don't think she's with us at the moment. But then to go on to the risk management update from the 5th of February on page 5, that's on the agenda anyway, so I won't cover that area for you. The self-assessment, that was reported at the last meeting. One of the items on there about a report on the adequacy of internal audit staffing and other resources to be brought to a future meeting of the Audit and Accounts Committee. We agreed, myself with you, Chair, and the Vice Chair, that we'd look to bring that to the June 2021 meeting, so we can get a whole year's worth of adequacy, etc., reported on there as part of a more overall assessment of effectiveness of the system of internal audit. And the training that you wanted from external audit, I agreed with external audit that will be presented at the March 21 meeting. If we move then on to the June meetings, they're both risk surgeries on there, so I won't. That's been completed, so I won't dwell on those. The same with the 29th of July, the contract waivers, that's completed. You reported on that the meeting on the 30th of September, Chair. And on the internal audit progress plan, you had an update from the head of strategic asset management and estates on the fixed assets audit from 2018-19. So I'm still awaiting more information from her to actually close this audit off. I know she promised it by the end of October. We've not received anything yet, and we have chased that, and we will continue to chase, and I'll keep you informed, Chair, you and the Vice Chair and the committee, as to the progress on that. The other thing that's happened on the resolutions is Democratic Services have added in the proposed actions arising from the self-assessment, and we've gone through those and detailed the progress made on those. Two of the items have just been covered in a training session stroke workshop I've done with members. So that's around on page 11, item 25 about the system of internal control. We've had an update on internal control and around that, and also the one on risk as well on the next page, page 12, which is at reference 28. That again, the role of risk management in the preparation of the internal audit plan has also been covered. So those two we can now tick off, and others we are working on as we go through. One of which will be the terms of reference, which is added as an item which is the 1920 self-assessment, which is on the agenda. And that's all I've got to say on that one, Chair.
Well, thanks very much for that update, Richard. And I think it's agreed. We said that it'd be good to just grey out so we don't dwell on stuff that's already been done and already been complete. I've got a couple of questions from committee members. First of all, Councillor Dinser. Right,
thank you. Thanks very much. Richard, just going back to the earlier item when you talked about the assembly rooms, where you said nothing more to report, and we'll do that when and if something happens. We do know there's planning application going through for demolition and then options. When does that come into our purview and our interest, and as a significant event?
Councillor Dinser, what I will be doing, I'll be picking that up. Once we see it, we will look at the risks around that. What we're more concerned about will be the contract around the new performance venue.
Right.
So that's what we'll be interested in.
Right.
What we may need to look at any contracts for demolition. It's not something we would normally do, to be honest, but we will look at the risks around it. And if there's any risks involved in that we feel that the committee need assurance on, then we will look at it and provide that. But it's something I'll be discussing with Simon, as Section 151 officer, anyway, before we start any work on that.
Yeah, the only reason I ask is that I know it's the early stages in terms of an application going to planning committee, in terms of what to do in terms of demolition and or options, and the options are in an open space. So it'd be helpful to know when you think it might be something that it does require visiting or not.
Yeah, what I'm planning, Councillor Dinser, to sit down with Simon and come up with what we're going to look at in the rest of Q3 and Q4. So we'll talk about it, and if it's going to be coming up in those, we'll bring it to committee and let committee know when we're looking at it. At the moment, I've not formed a view on it as yet.
Okay, thank you. Look forward to hearing your view.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for that. Now Sharon's here. I know I've got a couple of other questions on this, but before, in case she goes off again, I'm going to bring her in at this point, just to discuss the shared live audit and to give us an update on that. So I'll let you have the floor for now, Sharon. I think you're on mute, by the way. We can see you, but we can't hear you.
Sorry for my late arrival. I've got connection problems this morning. It's been a difficult one. Sorry. So my name's Sharon Vernon. I'm from the Shared Lives team. I'm a Shared Lives coordinator. And I've been invited to give an update on where we are with the audit that took place at the end of 2018. Quite a lot of change within the team since then. Obviously, Roger retired in March. We're still without a manager, so I've sort of been pulled in to keep the momentum and keep the audit recommendations going. The three recommendations outstanding are all going to be addressed by the new software that has been purchased to add on to what we do with the customers and how their information is recorded. So that did all start following the audit in 2018 with Ray Mansell. We worked on it for a good 10 or 12 months. It was really ready to go live this time last year. Then unfortunately there was an upgrade in the software and it lost basically all of the test area that we'd been working on. So that was really quite frustrating and a bit of a disappointing really, because we had done so much work. So Ray then retired and we've been waiting for his replacement to come. So since then we have been working with John all year. It's been a new issue of software, so we have had to go right back to basics really to get this rolling out. We've been working with Leicester Social Shared Lives. They use a similar thing to see how that's been working, and it will definitely work for Derby City. And so we've been working on the test areas since beginning of the year. COVID obviously unfortunately brought a bit of a delay to it with us all being pulled off in different directions due to the pressures, but we are now actually ready to go live with definitely within the next 2 weeks. So the recommendations, do you want me to just go through each individual one and how that will be addressed?
Yes, please. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
So the mandatory training, where there was a gap with carers attending and how we recorded that, there was difficulties last year with courses availability and carers availability. So I know Roger was part of the workforce development group on how we could do bespoke training for shared lives carers. We have now got that in place. We've been doing some evening courses, and one positive really of COVID and what difficulties we've had this year is that we are doing a lot of things remotely now on Skype with Microsoft Office. So carers are getting up to date with all the mandatory training. Again, the new system that we will have running along customer records will record all of this and flag up when training is due. We've also working with Caddiston Road on how we get records from them as well to input into the new system. The next area was regarding the carers assessments and matching. Again, the new system that we've got will record from when a carer applies to be a shared lives carer to when they get approved, and that will flow all the way through the process, and at any one time that information can be picked out, especially when we have CQC inspections, etc. And that will all be linked with the customer records as well, which I know was flagged up that wasn't in place before. And then there's the cross-referencing between carers and customers. That's all on contract really. That's how we pay the carers. They have to be linked with customers, and that's how we link them together with the service provisions, and that's how we get carers paid through the contract. So that is up and running and has been for quite a while.
Thanks for that, Sharon. I'm just interested, when you said you were put on back by losing a lot of the test data, wasn't there any sort of system of backup in process on all of that at all, which would have?
I mean, I'm not aware there was any. I know, Ray. I mean, Ray. It was just prior to 2 weeks before Ray retired, so obviously he didn't have a lot of time to. We basically did have to start from scratch again because the software that we were using, I think, how did he describe it? The add-on, the version of Liquid Logic that was very different when it was upgraded, so it didn't tie in with the test area, but that was what obviously the IT team were working with, and unfortunately, disappointingly, it lost most of the work.
That's a shame really, because it's put it back. So the sort of overall completion on all of these, that's sort of you're on track. You give us an update. You're on track overall. When do you think it will finally be? What's the
I've had an email from John this morning because the new version actually enables us to also load in all the documents that we use with carers around assessments and reviews. There's one document that needs to be loaded in this week, and then we've got a meeting next Wednesday where we will update the rest of the team, and we will be going live within the next 2 weeks.
Brilliant, thanks. Now, are there any other questions on this particular item with Sharon Vernon while she's here? Then we can let her go and come back to the other questions on this item. So I think, Councillor Kerr, you've written the second one, so I presume it's specifically on this. So
yes, thank you, Chair. I was just wondering whether the software provider had actually been working positively with you on this, because I would have expected the sorts of changes that internal audit highlighted to you would also be required by other people they're selling the software to. So they almost ought to have been grateful for this the scrutiny that we've given it. So were they easy to work with, or were they challenging? It sounded a bit challenging.
Sorry, you were breaking up a little bit there. Was there any? I mean, we worked with the IT team to say what requirements we needed to enable to record our carers in this way, and obviously they were working. I'm not with. Yeah, that the IT team were. I mean, I can find that out.
So was it? I thought it was purchased software rather than internally provided.
Yeah, so they purchased an add-on software to what we already use for customer records. So it was the initial add-on that was lost in that test area when there was an upgrade. From what I gather, I'm not got an IT background, but this is what we've been told. And then the new version was then not compatible with the previous test area, so that was what delayed things. And well, basically that's what we had to start from scratch really again.
Right, okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions specifically on this for shared lives audit update for Sharon at all from committee members? And we can let her go, and then I'll move on. Right, if there are no other questions, then thanks very much for turning up, Sharon. We do hope we can sort of see a move on that, and hope, I don't know, just one final thing just to think of actually is with going into lockdown again, are you like to be redeployed, and is that likely to cause a risk to completion of this?
No, I don't. I think because luckily all the work we've done up to date, and there's been a lot of obviously to and fro between myself and John. We had a team meeting a couple of weeks ago, so we're all up to date, and I think it'll be a lot of work getting the carers on, but we realise that's got to be done, and it'll be really effective, and it'll be a lot slicker when we've got it all up and running. So we don't envisage any more delays now.
Great. Well, you can. Thanks very much for that, for your update, and we'll let you go off now, so you can.
All right. Thank you. Sorry for the late arrival. Thank you. Bye.
It's all of be able to sort of bear with one another with all of this sort of IT stuff at the moment. Thank you. So, so now I'll go back to the main item. Main item now. We've got you again, Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm really pleased that there's this idea of greying out, but I just wanted to know what, Richard, you were meaning by greying out, because I don't want them greyed out. I don't want them there at all. The things that we've dealt with and are now history just don't need to be on the paperwork. So is that what you mean by greying out, i.e. taking away?
It was a suggestion from the chair and vice chair when we had a meeting earlier, but yeah, I mean, to take them out would be it would be probably much better in my opinion.
Yeah, because over time we're going to have more and more of, this document's going to get longer and longer and longer, and it isn't in a historic, we don't necessarily get the responses and completions in a logical order, and I just think it would make it much simpler to remove items that are no longer there. So we may have from a particular meetings items 2 and 7 left, and the other ones will be gone, but if we want to go back and look at the history of it, we can do.
I don't have a problem with that. I think that probably works better because people, as you say, can go historically back. So we'll change. If nobody's got any objection, and just write any objection in the chat, You don't have to say if you don't have any objection. Then what we'll do is we'll just change that recommendation to removing any stuff that's been completed.
The way I would look at it, Chair, is that once we've got an item that says completed against it, that is the message to say next time it doesn't need to be there at all.
That's fine. Yeah, it just brings to the meeting to agree it's been completed, then expunge it. Yes, we can put it in the guidance. Yeah, thank you. So we've got a question from Philip Sunderland.
Thank you, Chair. On page 13, 20/4, about the committee getting feedback on its performance and those interacting with the committee or relying on its work. Whilst you sought feedback from the Section 151 officer and so on, is there not some scope for getting feedback from wider members and non-audit and accounts committee members, the cabinet members of the committee on performance, any areas of development, to see whether they think we're adding value? Because if we're not adding value, what are we doing here? And they, in sense, we are reporting back to the council as a whole. Maybe the cabinet should be giving some opinions, just to widen out the consideration of whether we're getting any feedback from everybody who could do that. That was all of my only suggestion I was thinking of. Thank you.
Richard, do you want to come in there? Simon,
either? At the end of the day, Chair, it's down to yourself and Section 151 Officer Simon to decide whether, who you approach. But I mean, I agree with what Philip is saying. It adds to the effectiveness the more people you get giving you feedback.
Yeah, your thoughts at all, Simon?
I think it's proportionate. It's sort of a generally, if I feel that on the first engagement with Richard on this, I feel there's benefit for a wider engagement, we will do it. But I think we just have to keep this in proportion. That this is about, in a sense, a review of previous actions and everything else. So I'd probably do it through sort of individual circumstances rather than just setting up a process each time.
Well, yeah, thanks for your advice. Yeah, I suppose that the other people, of course, on this one would be, I think, the external auditors as well. And I know that it's possibly doing harder now, and it's possibly thinking it out. It's something we need to instate, because we've just lost it over COVID. But before some of the meetings, I know myself and the vice chair used to meet with the representatives of Ernst & Young as well, just before before the meetings, and possibly we should get some of those, get just a quick Skype call with Stephen Clark in place at some point as well.
Yeah, Chair, I've dialed in via phone now.
Oh, hi there.
Hi.
Yeah, do you want to say anything, Steve? Sorry, you were saying you're on the phone.
Yeah, no, so I was dialed down now. Did you want me to come in now on the report?
Yeah, I'm not on your report. No, yeah, we're just dealing with item 5 at the moment. Unless you've got anything to comment on what we're.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, I think that in terms of feedback, I think it's worth noting Phil's thing, and I think it's probably worth, as well as yourself, Simon, from your vast experience of working elsewhere, and also getting going to getting feedback from the external auditors as well, and also, of course, we some of us do go to these. You mentioned one earlier, of course, Phil, to these local audit quality forums as well, where we can sort of benchmark ourselves against other audit committees, where you have the great and the good, like one everybody seems to know, a guy called Tony Crawley, who seems to be the big guru on him, puts himself forward as the big guru on internal audit. Yes, I think there is sort of value to sort of pick that one up. So obviously we'll add that to the resolution, so we can see progress on that next time. Brilliant. So if there's no other comments on item
Chair?
5, oh, hi there, Councillor Kerr. Yes.
I just want to follow up on Philip's point, and one of the groups of people I thought it might be worth having a conversation with, maybe 6 months down the line, is people whom we have asked to come to committee, where we've got recommendations getting a bit sluggish. So people like Sharon, who have just come. I don't think we'll talk to her now. At the moment, she's just feeling pressured by having come to us. But 6 months on, to actually go back and say, we had, it was quite challenging getting through those. Did it help coming to committee? Did it help give you the authority to make sure that things moved forward? I think that might be quite useful.
And I also know, actually, we can say that what you don't get visibility on is sometimes that when we've had the pre-agenda meeting, or as you know, Councillor West and myself meet on a monthly basis with Richard, and he said, "Oh, I think this one potentially going to come before the meeting, and it's been a bit of a miscreant, and they've been a bit overdue." And we said, "Right, well, we want them at the next meeting." Surprisingly, quite amazingly, by the time sort of just before the meeting comes, they've closed it out. So it does seem to add pressure coming before members to sort of help Richard close some of these long-term stuff out. I think you can testify to that, can't you, Richard?
I can, Chair, yes.
Sorry, I've got to put myself on mute there, but brilliant. Okay, if there's anything else, nothing else on that one then, so we'll move on to item 5, and just note that we will sort of greying it out. We'll change the resolution to sort of deleting it after the meeting after it's been declared as completed on there, which I think it does work. And also we'll make a recommendation to consider feedback from wider stakeholders as well. So if nobody's got any objection to those two, I won't bother to take. We'll move on. Just put it in the comments now if you've got any objections to changing either of those. Right, there's no objections, so we shall move on to item 6, and that's Stephen Clark. And I hope you can hear us okay on the phone, Stephen, and talk about to your ISA 260 letter.
Yeah, okay. So this is our ISA 260 letter, kind of as it stands at the moment. And I'll kind of take you through that in the first instance, because there's been some updates from the version you had. So on page it's the status of the audit, so that's kind of page 5 of the document. I just want to run you through where we are now compared to where we were when we issued this this document, which was a few days ago now. So pensions disclosures, we are still waiting on IS 19 assurances from the pension fund auditor. This is still outstanding and is not expected to conclude until the end of November, which is not inconsistent with a number of other where most pension fund audits are delayed across the country. We haven't got an exact date. We will chase again, but clearly when we get that, we will then see what it says and see what we need to do with it, if anything, and then we will sign off. We can only really sign off once we've had that, which is, if that's at the end of November, it's more likely to be in December, depending on the precise date we get it. Evaluation of property, plant and equipment. We've got 2 issues. One is a material uncertainty on assets at fair value, and that's dealt with now. And the other was the treatment of the silk mill, and those I've dealt with on slide 12. Including on stability finance, the PFI providers. We've looked at those assessments, and we're looking at the moment that they're stable. We've done the reconciliation now between the housing benefits to the rent system. A letter of representation, we will obviously only get pretty much up to the point we sign the audit. The one that you've got is in draft. Subsequent events review procedures will be completed almost at the point of signing. Going concern assessment, we have been through that internal consultation. I think you've just got to, the council's yet got to change the wording. There's some minor wording changes on that, which I think we've passed off to the council. We're in discussion, but we're pretty much there in where that actually concludes. We've still got to get the final version of the AGS, check the going concern, the disclosures and the accounts that I've just discussed, and then whole of government accounts work isn't done until after we do the rest of the final audit yet. So that's kind of the status of the audit. The issues which I'll kind of run you through in terms of that. I mean, probably the main thing is the main key thing that we clearly have to focus on over and above what we would normally focus on is around the going concern assessment. We have done the work on that and don't need to make any further comment in our opinion, so there's no what would term emphasis of matter in respect of that. That's sufficiently well stated. Clearly, the other area where we have an except for opinion is in respect of the joint Ofsted CQC inspection. In respect of SEND, I mean, I don't particularly feel the need to pore over this because I kind of trailed this. It's been a point of debate for the council and on the risk register for the council for a period of time. We understand and acknowledge the work that the council has undertaken, certainly since the inspection, and our opinion is very much limited to the period from the 1st of April 19 to the 31st of March 20. And we've concluded that there is an except for qualification on the value for money and opinion as a result of that report directly. We've identified some other differences there which we talked about. So there's just some reclass on REFCUS expenditure, some reclass on receipts in advance, and a reduction in the pensions liability following further conclusion of the McLeod judgment. That wasn't really anything that the council could have foreseen in their draft statements, but it is just a change from the draft. And then there's a couple of other disclosure changes as well. I'm happy to go through the rest of the report in any detail you wish, but given it's fairly wide-ranging, I'll maybe just take some questions from yourselves at this point so that I'm focused on, what you want to understand.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I hope you can hear me okay. Yeah, so there is a number of questions from committee members, but I suppose particularly for me on the sort of thing overall, which you can maybe comment on, and particularly you've got various places where, particularly, say you've got other matters continued, and you've got the going concern page. You say you've not concluded our work in this area. However, the work carried out to date, we do not consider an emphasis of matter paragraph in respect to the impact on COVID on the operation. So what's the risk of that? Because I've got to sort of put my signature to the overall accounts. We're getting assurance from you. So what's the risk, really? The fact that
I think where we are now, given what I said, is that since we put this document in, we have actually gone through our internal consultation process, and we are content with the basis, the going concern basis, and we don't feel the need to put an emphasis of matter paragraph into our opinion. There is still some changes that the council needs to make, which we're discussing regarding precise wording around the disclosures and moving the disclosures from what is in effect in the narrative statement into note 1 under the basis of preparation. But apart from that, the actual basis for it is as it is. We won't need to put an emphasis of matter paragraph in.
Okay, thanks. And also, you haven't carried out the sort of procedures required by the National Audit Office on the whole of the governance accounts. Again, is that something that we need to be concerned about?
You can't do that until you finish the accounts audit.
Right. Okay. That's fine.
You can only do that when it's complete. Yeah. We would normally do that when we've completed the audit.
Okay. So generally, in terms of the overall risk, which should be my concern, there's not the stuff that you highlight there that's still outstanding. You haven't. There's nothing really that concerning. In terms of the risk. The main thing that is outstanding is in respect of receiving the assurance from the pensions fund auditor. However, you've made the adjustment from a cloud. We're not aware that there's anything going to come out of that audit which is going to put a big hole in the numbers. But until we get that confirmation, we can't finally conclude that piece of work. So that's the only real potential moving part to it. But I would hope at this point that you would have already been alerted to by the pensions authority that if there was a big issue. But, the main big issue is in respect of McLeod, and you've already adjusted for that. Yeah, thank you very much. So now I'm going to bring in some questions from other committee members to you, Stephen. I hope you can hear them okay. We'll try, if you can't, I'm sure sort of Steve Mason or somebody can try help them paraphrase them to you.
Yeah, no, you're
difficult on the phone. So we've got Philip Sunderland first then.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Right, just on the going concern section. So basically what you're saying, Stephen, as I gather it, you've cleared all the queries and Simon has provided all the information which you're required for that sort of thing. So that's okay. And I've just got a query about the very last paragraph on page 16, where you talk about unable to reconcile the inflows and outflows of the final cash position flows within the forecast between April 20 and March 21. Is that correct? Is that still correct, or have you been able to reconcile that? Are the dates correct as well?
Yeah, we're now in a position where we've been able to undertake those reconciliations, and we're happy with where the cash position is. So we've now been able to do that and conclude that. And
moving on to the medium-term financial plan, are you happy with the arrangements they've got in place for the medium-term financial plan, which comes up in page 22, I think? Yeah, you talk about that.
Yeah, we're happy. Yeah, we're happy with the arrangements in respect of the MTFS. It's a clear position from our perspective. You've clearly got some COVID impact, but
quite clearly.
But we're happy with the arrangements. Yes.
Just on a slightly wider aspect, the FRC inspection report criticised your GT and other companies. Have you had any problems from the FRC about quality of audits at all?
Well, if the actual FRC, all of our audits came out in the highest grade and have done for the last 2 years.
Well, that was what I was asking, really. What grade did they come out as? Because quite clearly, Grant Thornton and Mazars have been quite heavily.
Yeah, we're the only firm that's got the highest graded quality accounts.
So from that aspect, we can be satisfied that you've been doing it to the best of your ability and to the highest grade as required by the FRC. Yeah.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Philip. Next bit then is Councillor Pegg.
Thank you, Chair. With the sort of new lockdown coming into play, what impact with regards to delays will that have on the status of the audit, and are any sort of mitigating measures put in place to, take account of that?
Yeah, it doesn't have any impact because we've been doing it remotely anyway. We've not been on site, so it makes no difference to us in particular. Substantively, the work's done. I don't see an issue with that.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And then Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. Can I just start? This may seem a very small point, but I just wonder how it fits in. In your introductory letter, Stephen, you say that this report is intended solely for the use of ourselves and members of the authority and so on. But this is a public document that anybody across the globe can pick up.
Correct.
And I just wonder whether there is actually a conflict between us having this as a public document and that statement, and how we resolve it.
I don't think it needs resolving. The purpose of the document is that its purpose is that it is for you, for the authority and the Audit and Accounts Committee. I understand what you're saying, but so. But equally, it's a public document. So, it's on public papers.
It just sort of worries me a bit when you've got a statement that says we should not be giving it to any other party without obtaining your written consent. Now, that may have happened, that there may be that consent before we put it up on our website.
That's probably a bit misleading.
But I just feel it's not something that I feel there's a conflict there, and I'm not entirely comfortable with it. But maybe next version you can think about it.
We can amend that. We can just remove it. It's fine.
My next question was going to be about on page 6, when you're talking about our partnership working. Now, this was specifically talking about SEND and how we're working on the SEND agenda. But I wonder, we also have joint working with health in other areas, such as within public health, other elements of adult social care, our local area coordinators, for example. And I just wondered whether you had in your work and the concerns about the way our joint working is going on the SEND agenda, whether some of these other areas of joint working are things that you might have concerns about, because or things that we should be aware of, and be particularly maybe our internal audit should be aware of at this point.
So the way that we do this is we look at the overall arrangements. We don't tend to unpick specific arrangements unless there is some other information which comes to our attention, which draws that to it, and a regulator, Ofsted CQC inspection is one of those triggers. Hence why we talk about SEND. So there isn't anything more specific that I would point to as far as the work that we've undertaken, but you have to bear in mind that the work that we undertake is relatively limited. It's limited to the overall arrangements, and you report by kind of exception. I suppose the main issue is clearly the way in which you've, probably for the 2021 year, the way in which you've been operating with public health and with health coordinators across the patch will have a much greater consideration given the status we're now in, but I've got nothing specific to draw your attention to from the work we've undertaken.
Thank you. My other question would have been about the going concern, but I think we've covered that quite thoroughly now, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Steve. Just before we come on to the question from another question I've got, just linked in, I suppose, with the questions you've had on COVID, Steve, and under the, you talk about, after the going concern bit, you talk about that we identified an increased risk around the completeness, accuracy and appropriateness of information produced by the inability, due to the inability of the audit team to verify original documents. You talked about how you mitigated that. I presume that's because you did the audit remotely, and that's all because, you know, it was all done remotely and stuff.
Sorry, can you just say that again?
Yeah, so you talk about the way that you had an increased risk about, you know, the way you were able to look at and view information and appropriateness.
Yeah.
So you say you use various things, screen sharing. I presume that was the way, you know, it's helped a bit more information in response to one of the previous questions about the COVID stuff and how you did it, or will be doing it going forward. That's okay. Just to do, you do it due to the fact you were doing it remotely and stuff.
Yeah, so it is more challenging in respect of the working arrangements. People working, you know, both teams are working from home the vast majority of the time. Clearly that and we have continued to do that from an audit perspective. Clearly there is some more on-site working at the council, but subject to how those arrangements continue to work, you'll make your own view. So there are some challenges, inherent challenges on that front. It can be more difficult and logistically difficult to get people to respond, you know, on both sides at the right time. You can't just pop around to someone's desk and sit on their shoulder and ask for the information. Probably the main area that it impacts is in testing what we call information provided by the entity. So if you run a report from payroll which generates some numbers, you know, typically what we would do is we would just go and observe that being run. But you can't do that in this situation, so you literally have to, someone has to run it on their machine and share their screen with us so we can see it being run, which just take a little bit longer to do. But overall, you know, it's I wouldn't say it's not had no impact, but it's had probably a much less, a more limited impact than we would have all thought when we commenced this.
Well, thanks for the clarification on that. And then the final question I've got here is Stuart Green.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you to Stephen for clearly the huge amount of work that's gone into this report, and indeed for his narrative report. The substantive points that I had have been addressed by Philip and Councillors Kerr and Pegg, so I won't revisit those. Just some minor ones, if I may, Chair, but nevertheless I think they need to be addressed. Page 12 of the report, the 6th bullet point. The final two sentences of that paragraph just simply don't make sense. I think the period stop should be removed. There should be a comma there as well. If that could be looked at. Page 39 of the document, there is, let me see, it's headed, it's the when and where field of that little table. On page 39, the current paragraph reads: the statement of responsibilities serves as the form engagement between the ALD terms. It's just gobbledygook. It doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, okay.
This may well be a draft, Chair, but I know elected members have raised this point before, and this touches on something that Councillor Kerr has mentioned. This is a public document. At some point, Chair, as you say, you're going to put your name on these accounts. This report needs to be right. I would urge those responsible for its preparation to carefully proofread it, the final version, prior to its publication. That's all from me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Stuart. So if there's no other comments on this at all, or questions, then are we all okay with the recommendation at 2.1 of this item, which is just to note the content of the letter, but obviously to, I think particularly some of the comments that Stuart Green has raised, to correct some and clarify some of those comments that Stuart has raised, obviously, as well. So no objections to that. Yes, they're all saying agreed. Yeah, good. No objections to that. Let's move on. I'm getting okays in the messaging. Thanks very much. So let's move on now to the next item, item 7, which is the updated council's statement of accounts, and this is Simon Riley.
Thank you, Chair. This is the statement of accounts for financial year 2019-2020. Just to give you the sequence of information that you should be relying on in whether you are happy to sign off the accounts is twofold. The annual governance statement that you agreed at the last committee, which talked about our governance arrangements. The ISA 260 letter that you've just received from Ernst & Young about our financial statements. And we also have provided training to members in respect of interpreting the accounts, which should hopefully help you to understand the accounts. The accounts has a narrative statement which tries to sort of translate it into how, as a council, we manage our finances and the key messages. It then has a key statements, the balance sheet, the consolidated income and expenditure statement, cash flow, collection fund, movement on reserves, and then there are a whole series of disclosure notes, and they are in the reports. I think it's complementary to us that the accounts this year were prepared against the background of COVID. The draft accounts were published already and given to the auditors by the end of May, and we are now in a position, with the exception of a pension audit, to really sort of, I suppose, celebrate a fairly clean and well produced set of accounts. There were a few minor classification amendments that we will take the learning from and make sure that they are factored into our planning for the next financial year. And as the Council Section 151 officer, I just want to really compliment the finance team on producing a good set of accounts in time and trying to give as much interpretation to you as members to give you confidence to sign up the accounts. The recommendations, Chair, are to ask the committee to approve the audit financial statements as presented, subject to the outcome of the Derbyshire County Council pension audit and completion. As Stephen Clark has said, they should not have any material impact on the accounts and will tend to just be two netting off adjustments. And then, because that has not been received, and I am upset that it hasn't been received yet, to delegate to myself and the chair, subject to that, to sign off the final approval of the financial statements in line with the obligations of this committee. So there's a number of my staff on the call, and I'm happy to take any questions on the accounts.
Yeah, thanks very much. Just to clarify then, that you don't see that the pension, the outstanding pension items will substantially or have any real alteration to what's in this document before us then, Simon, just to really confirm that for the benefit of the committee people.
Ernst & Young have said that they don't think it will. Most of the adjustments on pensions just is on the balance sheet anyway, between two entries on the balance sheet. And I don't think it will have any material impact on the financial statements as we've reported it. And maybe just to help members, pension disclosures, as you know, due to assessments of actuarial valuations, longevity and everything else, do flick between financial years by quite significant amounts based on the actuary advice, and we have to take professional advice on that, and we did in the production of these accounts. So no, I think it will just be a series of adjustments, technical adjustments, rather than any material impact.
Right, and obviously the most important one is obviously the narrative statements and stuff. So yeah, so we've got a couple of questions. I presume yours is a comment, Stuart, where you've just said, you know, bravo to the officers involved in preparation of the financial statements. So you're just an appreciation there. Just confirm that, so that's good. So we've got a question first from Philip Sunderland.
It's not so much a question as a comment, really. At the last meeting, because of IT issues, I wasn't able to satisfactorily take part in the discussion. But I did want to comment that I had, previous to that meeting, provided a list of queries, several pages worth of detailed queries to Simon, and it's tribute to himself and the people who he works for that he was able to they were able to respond within a couple of days, and that they were detailed comments about specific items which weren't appropriate to discuss in open committee meeting. And I'd just like to congratulate Simon and the rest of his team really on producing the documents, the accounts at a reasonable, at a very good speed, and obviously reasonably straightforward and complete as best they can do. So I'd just like to put that on record really, just as a comment, because I wasn't able to do so last time. So I'm quite happy that the accounts from my point of view present a true and fair view and so on. Thank you much. Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, thanks for that, Phil. So the next question, only other question I've got is Councillor Kerr.
Mine isn't actually a real question either. It's thanks, because I think on two sides, I think we were both right to be cautious of some of the external elements that we weren't confident about back in September, to do with the pensions, to do with the going concern. And I think that working with the external audit, obviously with your team, Simon, we can now feel reassured about those. So that is great. And secondly, your comments about the learning from the elements of misclassification, for example, and I think that's a really positive, and I think it's a strong attitude to have, to say that, yes, you've spotted something, this is how we're going to deal with it. It's that whole of that sort of audit view on a microcosm. So I really appreciate that philosophy and way of working. So just thanks, really.
Thanks very much for that, Councillor Kerr. If there's no other questions, then are we okay to take the recommendations, which is to approve the audited financial statements for the year end 31st of March 2020, subject to outcome of Derbyshire County Council pension audit and completion of Ernst & Young's quality review? I think it does. I would add my reflect that it is in a lot better shape, obviously, than what was presented to us at the end of September, and certainly the questions that we've made in the previous item, particularly to the external auditors, who are of course the independent people who give us as elected members that assurance that, you know, it's sort of given me a lot of assurance that it is in a lot, very good shape now, apart from this pension audit. And then the second recommendation, 2.2, is to delegate authority for the final approval of the financial statement to the Strategic Director of Corporate Resources and Chair of the Audit and Accounts Committee, subject to satisfactory pension audit and any narrative amendments arising from EY's quality review. So are there any, before we decide whether or not to take a vote on that, are there any objections to that, really? Or otherwise, are we all in agreement? Are we all okay? Just type. Don't just bother to type in if you object. Obviously, that would be easier. Anybody object at all? No, I don't see any objections. Right. Okay. Sorry, I'm just muting myself. So if you go on to the next item, so we'll take that as those two recommendations, which is item 8, which is our terms of reference, and it's over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. The committee's terms of reference, it's best practice to review these on a regular basis. The last time the committee looked at or reviewed its terms of reference was at its meeting on the 7th of November 2018. It didn't review it at all last year. Now, what we did for the November 8, 2018 meeting was we set up a working group of a number of members of the committee to put together new terms of reference, which the committee agreed. Now, that was based on the model terms of reference from the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy in their guidance material, and we decided we would stick with. It was decided by the committee to keep to using that guidance material as best practice. However, there's been no changes to that guidance in the last couple of years. However, I have reviewed the terms of reference, and there's a couple of areas I think we just need to get further clarity on, and I've detailed those in paragraph 4.8. One's around the clarity on risk management and the committee's role in risk management, which is point 5 in the terms of reference. And so I've suggested in paragraph 4.8, I've put the current terms of reference paragraph number there, and to suggest it's replaced by to consider, approve and monitor the council's risk management framework and to seek assurances on its effectiveness. And that's something that both Simon, a Section 151 officer, and I have spoken to the committee about before, about making sure that we've got clarity on what the committee's role is with risk management, and it's around the effectiveness and adequacy of the framework. And so that brings that out more than I felt that the previous terms of reference was a bit woolly on that one. And the other one is I felt was too specific, and we were actually detailing the council policies around corruption, fraud, anti-bribery, anti-money laundering, etc. I think we needed to be less concise there and just call it counter-fraud policies and whistleblowing policy, but also to draw out the fact that the committee need to be getting assurance around how the council's dealing with fraud risks. That's a key one. So they're the two elements that I suggest committee look at, and hence in the recommendations we've got that the committee to consider the current terms of reference at Appendix 1 and suggest any amendments they might think of, but also to take on board the suggested amendments in paragraph 4.8 and whether they are appropriate or not.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, as we'll see later in the report coming towards us, and of course as the council's anti-fraud champion, of course it's particularly important in the current situation that we're going through at the moment, the whole COVID thing, of course, for Richard. Another thing, of course, that we've discussed, and I value, I think you and Simon particularly, to share your thoughts with the committee, is to add an additional recommendation, which is based around this, and particularly those changes that you've made. Sort of think of the actual name of the committee, and I know we were talking about this offline before, in a meeting we had before this meeting to go through the agenda, is to sort of change it to something like around Governance and Audit Committee or something similar, because of course we deal with a lot more than just the sort of accounts. Obviously accounts, signing off the accounts, as we've just discussed, of course, is part of our remit, but more importantly we obviously oversee your work in audit, but we also deal with a lot of the governance framework of the council, and that brings in some of the aspects that you've just mentioned around looking at the fraud risk, looking at, as we will do later on, looking at the waivers, looking at the risk and the whole council's risk system as well. And really, and I sort of often get people thinking that I'm some guru on the councillor guru on the whole account status by virtue of being chair of this committee. And so I think it, from what you were saying, it does sort of possibly better reflects our work. But we'd obviously value thoughts from other members of the committee. But just, I know that you had some particular comments on this, Richard, and then maybe you and Simon want to comment on that suggestion and query I've got as well.
Well, with your permission, Chair, many councils have morphed their audit committee into a title such as Governance and Audit, and because really you are the assurance people, which is what these two recommendations are doing, and you're concerned about making sure that the assurance and control framework is in place and it links into delivering the purpose, vision and all the other aspects of the annual governance statement, I think actually making it that your focus is on that oversight and overview in the title, and maybe recommending from the beginning of the next financial municipal year this committee be retitled Governance and Audit. I think it does create that emphasis about what the main role of the audit committee is. You sign off the accounts on behalf of the council because we have to have a authorisation route for it, but the majority of your work is about assurance, governance and internal control. Happy to take any comments from members or answer any queries.
Yeah, that, and obviously not only on that comment that I've just sort of put in there, but obviously on any other aspects of this report as well, of course. Then of course, and Richard's just said, does it need approval from council at all? You know, do we have to put it to full council? Simon, I don't know what your.
That is, if you were minded to add this as a recommendation, it's probably to recommend to council that the Audit and Accounts Committee becomes a Governance and Audit Committee in the new municipal year.
Yeah, okay, and could we put that to the next meeting, do you think? Just as an item on the agenda at the next, if we agree to that, an item on the agenda, seeing as we're doing the annual report on this at the next meeting, it would make sense possibly, provided what other committee members say. And of course, we still can put items on the agenda for that now, can't we? Because we haven't met the closure date for motions or anything.
It is not time dependent, Chair, if we're going to do it for the new municipal year. So, Council Care, there needs to be a change to Council Standing Orders, so that would go through at the AGM with other changes. So we're just recommending that as we enter the new municipal year, that you are minded to ask whether the council is happy to call it Governance and Audit as opposed to Audit and Accounts.
Okay, brilliant. So we'll do that then at that point then. Brilliant. Did you want to ask a question then, Councillor Kerr, as well?
Yes, please. Yeah, I just want, this is something I'm not sure, I don't know the answer to, but one of the sources of our information and our guidance comes from our independent members of the committee. But out there in the city, we've got thousands of other people who might also have an interest. And I wondered if there was any role that we should have, or we could have, which actually acknowledges the potential for public comments or public referrals to us. And I just wondered if that was something we ought to think about, or maybe Richard should think about before any further review of our ways of working. What do we call it? Our terms of reference.
Richard?
Thank you, Chair. It's not something that I'm aware of, and a lot of audit committees are actually held in private. I've not come across, I'm not aware of any audit committees where public questions are taken. Public can attend them, but it's not something that I'm aware of. I don't know if Simon's ever come across it. I certainly haven't.
A number of years ago, this ability for people to raise areas of concern was encapsulated a bit in the transparency requirements of the council of publishing certain core information. For example, creditors over £500, senior staffing structures, contracts, and everything else. If we get any referrals, if you want to call it what it was called at the time, the armchair auditors, who now have information to be able to look at the council's system, spend and controls, then if any referrals come into us either through whistleblowing, either through fraud, or even Director Richard as Head of Internal Audit, we'd factor that into our audit programme. So the Transparency Act of Council Care is generally what gives the information that allows people to make references into us. As Richard says, it's not normal that we would have a public questioning session in an audit committee.
Through you, Chair, I wasn't thinking of a formal question point like you would have in a planning committee. I was thinking more that it could be acknowledged in our terms of reference that the public can be a source of work that we might do.
And I'm happy for that to be added.
Yeah, probably in the ways you've described, Simon.
Okay, so yeah, if you want to, do you want to put some some sort of thing in the comments, Councillor Kerr? Because I think Phil wants to come in, and then we can add that as a recommendation then. Phil, are you there? I think you're.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just reflecting that. I mean, maybe we've forgotten the fact that the statement of accounts are on deposit for a period of time, which is advertised in the press and everywhere else, and members of the public can come and inspect the accounts and raise questions and, if necessary, objections. This is already provided for, and it's been an available for people to do ever since I can remember it, ever since I started working, and that was some considerable time ago. So I am assuming that we didn't have any people coming to inspect the accounts because they probably weren't available in the same format as they normally would be. I mean, quite clearly, one of the regular people we always used to get when I worked was the local press used to come and have a look at members' allowances and things like that. But, I would suggest that there is an availability for public to already come and ask questions, so it wouldn't be about the accounts, so it wouldn't be necessarily something that would have to happen at every committee meeting. It would happen anyway through the normal public processes, which has been provided for some time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we're just waiting for Councillor Kerr's addition to our terms of reference, and Stephen's. Did you want to say something, Stephen? I see you're typing a message.
Thanks, Chair. I think it was just all I was going to add there is we must have, of course, remember, turn my camera on, excuse me. We must, of course, remember the provision for members of the public to ask questions at council. That's what I wanted to say. I thought it was just important to flag that up.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's good. So what Councillor Kerr is suggesting, if people can read in the comments, is so if there's no other comments on this or questions on this. So
what I was suggesting is that it would go in the governance risk and control section of our terms of reference and make it the last point there, and say something like to be made aware of concerns from the public in the area of governance and audit and bring these to committee if appropriate.
Right, okay.
So something along those lines is what I'm suggesting.
Right, okay. So is everybody okay with the recommendations that we've got to make the changes 2.1 and 2.2? Add a further recommendation that we change, that we put before full council, that we change the committee's name, that they're minded, to go for the AGM, to change the committee's name to the Governance and Audit Committee. So if we add that, we add that recommendation as well. And then also with Councillor Kerr's recommendation to add to point 10 to be made aware of concerns from the public in the area of governance and audit and bring these to committee if appropriate. So is everybody okay with taking those recommendations? If you object, then just put that in the comments. Otherwise, if you don't say anything, it will just be assumed you agree, obviously. Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks very much for that one. So that we'll take that one through then, the committee's terms of reference. So the next one is item 9, and it's you, Simon, on the Treasury management.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's a requirement of the CIPFA Code of Treasury Code of Practice that you receive an annual investment strategy, which you receive at the February Council, linked to the budget, and that you receive a mid-year report which details our Treasury activity, performance, and the context of a Treasury environment we're working in. This report really highlights that we haven't had the need to borrow in this financial year, which is what we said back in February, that we are still under borrowed because we're using our internal investments to offset the need for more expensive borrowing. Having said that, in March, when the first COVID pandemic wave came, which is traditionally the time when the cash position of the council is the lowest, we did go and borrow £20 million from the Public Works Loan Board, just to give us a buffer of cash flow. That gets repaid in March, and we don't feel the need to refresh that because now the COVID funding flows and everything else is more certain. The other context of the year is that investment returns has gone down very significantly, and the council's principles behind investment returns is security, risk and return, which is sort of in that order deliberately. That it's making sure that the capital invested is secure, that we spread the risk by spreading it through a number of institutions, and the return, which is the financial interest that we get on investments, we seek to optimize it, but not to seek the highest interest rates just because it's the highest interest rates. Having said that, interest rates have gone down in the year to generally about 0.1%. And for 3 weeks in the summer, the government bank, the debt management office, was actually only offering negative interest rates, which meant that we would have invested, say, £10 million, and we would have had to have paid the DMO to have that investment in there. So as a result of that, I balanced the three aspects of security, risk and return, and increased the threshold that we could put in money market accounts, which is about spreading the risk over a number of money market funds. So if any failed, the capital is broadly secured. So I made a decision in year for that. And we've also had to look at where we place money. We wanted to place with other local authorities, but they weren't in a position to match our sort of our cash for a period that they wanted to borrow for. So we did have to keep more in the debt management office than I would like, which is generating very little return. But all of this is in the context of those three overriding principles, and I feel that this report is consistent with that. This report goes to Cabinet and then to Council as a requirement under the Code. The other bit of this report is it talks about a change in accounting treatment, which was reflected in the accounts in respect of HRA set aside, where the changing in accounting treatment means that more debt charges, which are taken out and put a portion between the housing revenue account and the general fund, is falling on the general fund, which shows about a 700,000 hit this year in accordance with our revised accounting policy, offset by about 200,000 of net savings in our borrowing assumptions. But this report really says that it's been a very quiet year. It's been quiet in terms of treasury management. But having said that, some of our cash flows of getting money from government and passing on to businesses, COVID, collection fund receipts, all the other aspects of what generates our net cash, it's been a very volatile year. But your treasury management is as far as we can work with the markets, work in terms of placing our investments, is that we have been consistent with the treasury management strategy of the council set itself. Happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you. We've got a number of questions from committee members, but just before Simon, I think there's a couple of typos I've noticed, which I don't know if you can change it on what's going to go put to the cabinet if they are genuine typos. But at section 8.1 on page 5, should that be debt outstanding at the 30th September 2020 rather than 2019? I want to go to it, and I'll want to do with that. I'll just check that one. Then yeah.
Sorry, can you just repeat your question, because I've now come up with the page. So
yeah, so page 5, 8.1, where you talk about the analysis of external debt outstanding at the 30th September 2019. Should that in fact be 2020?
It should say 2020. Thank you for pointing that out and picking up Stuart's comment. We need to make sure that we have a quality assurance on all the dates, because this is often a report that is refreshed.
Yeah, and then if you want to pile up these questions, so on the next one, on table 4, on page 6, you talk about like a net movement of minus. You've got local authorities, and you've got minus 21,000, I think. So what was the cause of that net movement? And then again, I think it's another typo on page 7, paragraph 9.4. You talk about the investment income in the authorities 2021 was set against. So is there a word missing there? Where you talk about where you've got in the authorities 2021, the authorities what? 2020, 21 what?
2020-21 budget.
Yes, I thought it might be that. So you probably want to correct that. I don't know if you can correct this going to the cabinet next week, so you don't get it again as exec scrutiny. But you won't get any other comments from me. Comment about it now. And then the other genuine question is at 9.6 is there any action that can be taken to address this sort of, where you talk about the rate of return on investments? Is there any action that can be taken to address that without increasing risk too much, particularly as you note in table 9, that the council is well within its borrowing limits? And then finally, events have overtaken you since I think you wrote this in paragraph 13.1. Should you or will you have to change that based on the changing situation now with a national lockdown? So you obviously got a couple of typos, but if you could sort of answer just those 3 sort of clarifications on those paragraphs, Simon, and we'll take questions from other members of the committee.
So thank you, Chair, for that. In respect of the 21 million in the sort of table that you mentioned, we take out or we invest money for a period because we do a cash flow forecast which gives us confidence that we can place an investment with another local authority for 30, 60, 90 days or whatever period of time. They are scheduled to be repaid and aren't automatically then reinvested because our cash flow position will have been updated. So this is just repayments of local authority loans that were due to be repaid in this financial year, or local authority investments that effectively came back to us in this financial year. As I said in my introduction, we are having problems with getting other local authorities to want our cash for the period that we're willing to put it out, which means that we often have to go into the debt management office or other funding streams to invest our money. And you can see on the same table, there's been an increase in the debt management office because of that problem. In terms of the weighted average or the WAM, it referred to in paragraph 9.6. I have tried to address it by moving some of our balance between the DMO, which was giving negative returns or almost zero return, into money market funds, which is giving at least below sort of a 0.1, 0.3 return. But I'm a great believer that in a time of national financial volatility, that councils should be pursuing security, and that it becomes more important when the financial health for credit tests, the stress tests to banks will be being impacted on by bad debts and everything else. So I don't have any qualms about pursuing security more than return at this period of time, and any greater return we could do would be relatively immaterial because of the interest rates we're going. And picking up the Chair's last comment on the lockdown, it's not for me as an officer to talk about the merits of the sort of fiscal framework which has been put in around the COVID-19 pandemic, but I think the issue for us is about making sure that against the uncertainty and having to fund interventions in the city, we always have enough cash to do that at the right time, and we can draw on our internal cash to make sure that we can do the right response. Where interest rates go, I think interest rates may go negative in the future, and that is going to be a very interesting dynamic for businesses, public sector and individuals about either a zero or negative interest rates, and how that will influence decisions for people making savings, investments. Our view will always be to focus on security over return, especially if there is no return, which makes sense, I suppose.
Thank you. I think it was more around the comment that it says, while the strict initial lockdown restrictions have eased, we're about to go into a national lockdown. I don't know whether it warrants a change because of that at all. I don't know.
Yeah, it's for data producing a report, so I'm happy that it's a context as of a data producing report.
Okay, fine. Now just we're sort of seeing whether things move on. So the next, we've got a number of other questions here. So I think the first one is from Phil.
Thank you, Simon. Quite clearly, the authority is not going to want to borrow unless it needs to borrow, and obviously it hasn't done any borrowing in the last year, as you said. I would just a question really. I'll enclose provide the advice on presumably the way forward. External borrowing is around £358 million, and historically interest rates are at a very low. I've just come across in my PFA update thing that one of the London boroughs has just raised £250 million at a rate of 1.7%, which is well below the PWLB rate. Is there any scope for replacing the PWLB with a cheaper bond issue or other aspects? Just a question really, Simon. Thanks.
So what Philip has raised is that a number of councils have accessed themselves of what is called the UK Municipal Bond Agency. Started off with Lancashire County Council, Sutton, who Philip is referring to, have just secured a bond at 1.17%, and that is lower than PWLB. As and when we need to go out and borrow, because that would still be a net cost to us relative to interest rates, I think we will be looking at the UK Municipal Bond Agency as an alternative to Public Works Loan Board. And the context there is that because the government were worried about the level of public councils' public work borrowing, last October, I think it was, they added 1% onto the Public Works Loan Board amount, taking interest rates up to about 2.8% to deter speculative commercial borrowing. I'm expecting that might get removed, that 1% dampening premium. If that then brings us down to 1.8% as a Public Works Loan Board, then it will be a much more narrower balance between the municipal bond option that is relatively new and Public Works Loan Board.
Is that okay, Phil?
Thank you very much for that.
Good. And then we've got another two questions. I think you've come in twice, Councillor Kerr, but I'm happy if you want to ask your questions together in one stint. Then when you've finished, if Stuart wants to come in with his question as well, just let him carry on straight after you've finished, Councillor Kerr. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I think I just lost track of the notes. Yeah, we've got to hear you've highlighted the difference in the investment returns. Table 5 has the difference between last year at 0.73% and so far this year at 0.17%. Talked about it going even lower. But we also have the significantly higher return, which you show in the table 7 of the non-treasury investments, where our directly owned investment property, loans to small businesses and loans to Derby Homes are all significantly higher. And they are doing things which are actively positive in other ways, mostly for the city. So we're creating housing opportunity for residents here. We're looking at our economy and so on. And I just feel that maybe the time has come. We obviously need to balance the liquidity that we have on doing things like that against our need for cash flow, which was clearly highlighted by the internal audit earlier on this morning in the meeting. But I'm just thinking whether there is a need or an opportunity here to review to see whether there are ways in which we can get the return that we need for well-being in our cash flow against where we are doing the investment. the particular area that I feel that there's opportunity for at the moment is our investment across the city in renewables to reduce our carbon footprint as a city, and the returns on solar panels, for example, are really quite high at the moment. The returns on insulation should be good, and there ought to be a way, I feel, that we could put together a package that would both get return on investment for ourselves, but also potentially get investment in from other people as well. And I just wonder whether there's a piece of work that we might be doing as an authority to explore those sorts of things, and see whether other authorities or the LGA have got experience of doing that as well. And both from the city and from our rate of return positions.
Thank you.
And if so, what the process is for doing it.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. I can't remember whether around this time last year I talked about the council's commercial agenda of using some of its borrowing power to improve either economic regeneration or well-being of the city. So, for example, whether we want to look at developing houses for rent to generate a return. A number of councils have looked at, as you've said, green initiatives and solar farms. Some, as always, have gone to extremes. I think it's either Thanet or Thurrock down in Kent has got £1 billion exposure to a series of solar farms. So it's all about being in proportion. When the return is literally zero, then we have to, not just for the social reasons or not just for financial reasons, but we are, if you want to call it, someone who can invest in the city to deliver better outcomes for the city and use some of our ability as a place shaper, and borrowing is one of the options to us. Disposals are, land and partnerships are, and we need to look, especially with Derby Homes, how we can bring forward some of those initiatives that will benefit big proportions of our city, such as thermal insulation, such as energy feed-ins and everything else. So if I'm going to be honest, with the COVID pandemic, the staff teams have been focusing on interventions which are about keeping our communities safe. So that is slightly on the sort of the middle burner, not the back burner, and we'll come back when we have time to, in a sense, shape, look at the risks, look at the opportunities, and I suppose ultimately look at the partnerships, because we don't have to be the single funder in here. We might do it in partnership with Derby Homes, we might do it in partnership with the university, and I think there are some exciting opportunities out there.
So, Chair, may I come back and just say, Simon, so how do we take this forward? The pressure financially is clearly going in one direction. You're expecting interest rates to fall further. The climate demand is pushing us as well. The social need within the city is also growing. So how do we get the capacity to take this forward and do those commercialisation works that you mentioned?
As I've said, at the moment our focus is on our COVID response. But Alison Parkin, who's our new Acting Director of Finance, it will be on our work plan for next year to make sure that we can develop those robust business cases, which helps us to make that return on our investments and invest in the city. So we will bring it forward, but it will probably be a scheme at a time, and I want these business cases to be whole life, and I want it to look at aspects like social impact, public value, and all the other indicators which indicate whether the public pound is generating a return. We often just look at it in terms of economic return, gross value added, and I think that is one dimension, but we need to have a look at other dimensions, which is our role as a council. So I fully support it. We'll be bringing it forward as and when we have the capacity. And if I'm going to be honest, some of the financial challenges facing councils is that when we have a breathing space, we want to do it because actually we need to broaden our sort of investment strategy, broaden how we impact on the city and everything else. So I'm excited about it, but we just don't have capacity at the moment.
Chair, I'm just wondering whether the urgency at the moment is, and the potential benefits mean that we should be looking at how to buy in the capacity, how we look at some of our funding for change, or even the £3 million we've put towards green initiatives, whether we should be drawing on that to say, look, this is something that's important, we need to move it now, rather than waiting 6 months when we may or may not have the capacity in 21-22.
That is an absolutely valid comment, and you've mentioned, say, the £3 million enabling pot for climate change that might be able to initiate some of these. What I'd caution against is every council in the past have had lovely prospectuses and investment prospectuses from third-party consultants, which then don't get embedded into the council's governance process, and then they don't deliver all the benefits which are said. So I do need to make sure it's grounded back into the council. There's a right ownership, there's proper project management and governance framework around it, because this is council money that we're investing, that you read as many stories of these initiatives that go wrong as you do about those that go right, and I need to safeguard the council's money to make sure that when we enter into those, the evidence you have, the risk transfer is assessed and everything else, that our money is safeguarded, but hopefully getting a return on investment.
Yeah, it's absolutely the risk, of course, because we'd be the first on if, and you could imagine the outroar if, we invested in stuff and there was a massive waste of money, the press would be on us, and as has happened at other times, of course. Yeah, I don't know, Councillor Kerr, if you wanted to, we've got the opportunity in our actual committee paper, item 9, on some of the sort of things that we've asked to recommendations, paragraphs 2.1 and 2.2. I don't know if you wanted to add something additional there that for the council to have some sort of watching brief over, if you want to put something in the comments box while we bring in Stuart Green with his question.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, substantive questions have been perfectly synthesised by Philip and indeed Councillor Kerr. So just a point of assurance, not least for Simon and for the elected members, if I may, very, very, very similar to position to what I see elsewhere. Very similar position to what I see evidence coming through my ivory tower here. So Derby aren't alone in this. And indeed, the conversation that we've had today regarding financing opportunities, regarding investment opportunities, lots of other organisations are having those as well. There was just one thing perhaps that might be worthy of raising, Chair, if I may. I appreciate there are all kinds of different factors that kind of coming together here that have resulted in the net position, but nevertheless the net position is still one of a pressure, is it not? So overall, given everything that's happened, Derby City does still have a net pressure, which I understand would be met from a reserve. Simon, is that right? Some kind of earmarked reserve to deal with these pressures. How might that overall position be best explained to a layperson? So ordinary Joe or Josephine blogs out there looking at this might reasonably ask the question, how have we ended up with a net pressure here when money is so cheap?
Right, it sounds like an exam question there, Stuart, but sort of I think there's twofold. Firstly, we as a council have a treasury management reserve and a budget risk reserve that smooths the impact of delivery, the amount that we have to borrow for cash flow, the investments that or not borrow for cash flow, the amount we need to borrow, and then the net investments that we have. And a number of years ago, this council created that framework that, in a sense, meant that the volatility of a year of non-delivery or interest rate changes was accommodated, and there's money set aside for that potential phasing over a number of years. I think the issue of how we explain net debt and net investments is actually quite an interesting one, because there's a situation where this council before last year hadn't borrowed for many years because of its internal investments, and people are losing this connection between, you say you have £1 million, £100 million capital programme, of which you're going to borrow 50 million, but you haven't borrowed for that, but even though we spent that money 5 years ago, because you've got internal cash, some which are cash backed at reserves and some of which are timing issues and everything else. And then it gets a very, very complex explanation. So what we try and do is to say, just have a net return from our netting off borrowing and investment, and try and say, are we in line with the amount that we've set aside or expecting the budget? So I could write 10,000 words on it, and if you want to mark it, then I'm happy about that. But sort of it is one where, even as someone who's good at storytelling on financial statements, I would struggle to communicate that to the person in the street. And my focus is very much on my role as your treasurer is to ensure the money is secure, that risks are understood, and that returns are in line with the parameters that we set ourselves as a council in the prudential indicators in February, and that we are being compliant with the direction the council sets. So an honest answer to a very difficult question, Stuart.
Thank you, Simon. I just come back if I may, Chair, just to thank Simon for his reply. I have to say, Simon, it's not something I'm fully conversant with at this point. Any sense of assurance I can give to the elected members here is such that I get the sense, Simon, if I may, that you guys are well on the ball with this. But yeah, I appreciate the complexities here. The kind of inference, if you like, from the report is such that, you know, the explanation is there. I just guess, you know, if anyone went looking for more detail, then yeah, good luck in putting that together. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much. So if there's no other questions then from the committee, thanks very much. I do know it is, you know, does have a good sort of managed light there to it, and obviously it's, you know, this is just to sort of us to have a look at it before it goes to, and obviously goes to cabinet next week. So are we okay then to pass this with the two recommendations on item 9?
Chair?
Yeah, I'm just going to take yours in a minute, Councillor.
Yeah, I just want to do a preamble to it. I'm not sure whether we, Chair, can actually make a recommendation like this, or whether it needs to go to cabinet or to council. I'm not quite sure of the route, so I've just said to recommend that, but it might need to go somewhere. So I'd like advice on that, please.
Yeah, okay, yeah, take the officer advice. If one of the officers wants to come in, Steve possibly, and then Richard or Simon.
I'm just reading it, this very extensive
I'm happy to just
proposal.
make a
I think
comment.
it's more something that Simon can answer, I think.
Yeah, given the sequence here, I'm happy that Stephen can pass this comment or recommendation to inform exec scrutiny and cabinet, because it's next week that cabinet will consider it, and then council at the end of the month. So rather than making a recommendation anywhere, I think we'll just do an extract of the minutes which includes this, and then it will be there for exec scrutiny and cabinet to consider the views of the audit committee.
Okay, so this will come now as an extra item to cabinet next week as a minute extract then. Is that right, Simon, just to confirm? Yeah,
that is the easiest way, because ultimately it's for council to approve, and what you want is cabinet in considering it to consider your view.
Right, so I think we need to get the views on the committee. So given the nature of this one, is there do you want to just go around and take a vote?
Chair, shall I read it out?
Yeah, okay, and then we can just take a vote on this, as it's going to be a minute extra, and then if that's okay, Stephen, if you want to read out, let the councillor read it out, then you sort of manage the vote, Steve.
So what I've suggested is that Audit and Accounts would support that in the light of ongoing low interest rates, growing social need within the city and the urgency of climate action, that the Council explores the potential for commercial investment in areas like housing, energy efficiency and renewable energy, potentially with additional resource, so that work on this can be taken forward soonest, but with the necessary safeguards.
Right, thanks. I'll hand over to Steve to manage a vote then.
Okay, Chair, thank you. I'll just go through start my camera, excuse me. Okay, so let's go through the members in alphabetical order. Councillor Bettany, please.
Yes, I'll vote in favour of that.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr, please.
Yes, I support that.
Thank you. Councillor Dinser, please.
Yes, Stephen, I would support that.
Thanks, Councillor Dinser. Councillor Shiraz Khan, please.
Yes, Stephen, I'll support that.
Thanks, Councillor Khan. Councillor McChrystal, please.
Yes, I'll support that.
Thanks, Councillor McChrystal. Councillor Patterson, are you on the call? I don't think so. Councillor Adrian Pegg, please.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Pegg. And finally, yourself, Chair.
Yeah, I agree that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's unanimous in favour.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's good to get that unanimous, so we can make a note of that in the minutes then, possibly, that it was taken unanimously. And I presume everybody else is okay with. If you've got any objections to 2.1 and 2.2, put them in the comments and we'll take another vote. Otherwise, we'll move on to item 10, which is the waivers, and I think Linda Spilby's on, so we'll hand over to you, Linda.
Thank you, Chair. Just an overview of what the report says. The number of waivers is coming down, which is pleasing, and the avoidable waivers are also coming down. As previously, the report does contain the avoidable waivers and the details thereof. So if anyone would like to ask any questions on that, happy to respond or come back at a later date if I need to go away and get some information.
Yeah, I think the main concern, is around the sort of avoidable waivers. Why they occurred, really. If they're avoidable, obviously. But I suppose I'm particularly interested myself in the if you go on to page 3. The second and third avoidable waiver, where it talks about recruiting a specific individual in, and it's sort of why, particularly that it happened a second time around. Why they needed the two waivers around that, and how that person was selected and chosen to be the right person, really, for that role, I suppose. Because it seemed why they suddenly selected in that person.
Well, I can answer that in part. That person's actually worked for the council before and done some project work, and the reason for the second waiver was the optimistic timescale of completing the works in the first instance, and the fact that we're still unable to recruit to those type of roles within the property section of the council. Benjamin has worked for the council previously on major projects and has a very good track record for the council, which is why he's been brought back in to oversee what is obviously Beckett Wellbeing, a very large project.
Okay, yeah, I suppose so. It's his previous track record then. It's not somebody unknown then, so it's sort of justifiable in that way then. And I think it would be beneficial for committee members just to have obviously you've clarified those two, just to have a quick resume on the other. There are 4 others there. that, you know, and I think Councillor Kerr, you wanted to follow up on that one, but then after you followed up with Councillor Kerr on that project one, then if you just give us a quick resume on the other reason for the other four, because obviously it's a matter of concern that these things that were avoidable have had to be raised as waivers against the council's normal processes. But I'll let you do your follow-up first, Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, thank you. I was just amazed at the value here. You know, more than £160,000 in you know, within the year. We're talking about a large amount of money here for a and it's going to be a significant part of the costs of the assembly rooms replacement, if you like, that we're carrying. And it's part of, I think, maybe what we need to be getting internal audit to look at from that Hardiel was raising at the beginning of the meeting. That this is, it may be necessary, but it's also a significant cost, and at a time when there's a lot of uncertainty.
I think we can agree with you there, Councillor Kerr. And you come back on that, Linda, and then we'll obviously just ask you to quickly resume the reason for why, you know, obviously you've described what it is there, but the reason behind the other four waivers.
Yes, Chair. I think you'll find that the projects are being audited anyway, but Richard's probably best placed to confirm that. But everything's going through PMO and proper, you know, chaired, minuted meetings, etc. So I don't think there's any question of the processes not being transparent or anything such. To go through the other avoidable waivers, the first one, which is the pool cars, the electric pool cars that are parked outside the council house. The reason for that waiver was that the previous contract, which was paid for by funding, expired, and the actual management of the contract moved from the people that were managing the funding back into the Stores Road, and the gentleman there wasn't aware of the contract details, so it was actually expired, and we felt it was worth doing the waiver to ensure that we'd still got the use of electric cars for people driving around the city. That's the first one. The Live Well item, which is at the bottom of page 3. The current this waiver's been done so that the platform can be rebuilt, because obviously with additional pressures on the well-being of our employees and such, we felt that we'd act swiftly and get this updated so that it could be used to its best potential, and having Fluid Ideas do the work, it was actually a lower cost to the council than we probably would have achieved by going out to tender. The supervised contact was a waiver that was approved at Cabinet and is on this report just for completeness, so that all the waivers have been reported to Audit and Accounts. So that was just for the committee to note, because that approval's obviously already taken place. And the last one, which there is very little detail on, so I do apologise. I will have to come back and report the additional information on that, and send that to members after the meeting, if that will be allowed. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine on the last one, but I think in terms of the first one, it's obviously a small amount. Has something been put in place to sort of provide, because it's obviously a great thing that providing these electric cars across the city, brilliant. Has something now been put in place to make that more of an ongoing thing, so you don't need a waiver again, and it's a more permanent thing in terms of that one? And then the other one then is it's, you know, when Cancer Care was calculating those two ones together, the numbers 2 and 3 together was about, you said about 160 odd thousand. Well, this is 135,000, and that's quite a large money as well, large amount of money as well. So why is there a waiver that's been approved by Cabinet for such a large amount of money? And of course, your comment there as well, Councillor Care, which I'll just bring up as well, is the final waivers, which you're going to find, Linda's going to find more details about, was the 12th of November, nearly a year ago, well, almost like a year ago. So why is it taking so long to come to us?
Sorry, Chair, I don't know the answer, but as I'm going away to find out the detail, I will cover that in my response to the committee when I come back with that information. On the other item, the 135, what I will do is I will find the extract from the Cabinet papers to say why it went to Cabinet. I don't know. The value of it would have required Cabinet approval. So I will find the Cabinet minutes and circulate that with the information that I already have to have on the other.
Thank you. It's just what the details of that were a bit more. And then the first one now, I asked about is there something more permanent being put in place now to avoid a waiver again on the electric car provision on the first one?
Yes, indeed, because it's on the waiver report, it's actually been added to the contracts register, and it's therefore in our pipeline report, and a process will be done so that we can continue with that provision going forward in a compliant manner.
Brilliant, that's a good answer. So if you could find out some more, if nobody's got any other queries then from other committee members on these waivers, and if we take the recommendation to note the contents of the report and the reduction in the total number of waivers being reported since the last report, but we wanted you were going to send round some more, circulate some more information about waivers 5 and 6 as well, if we can take that on the recommendations and circulate them down to the committee. Yes, Councillor Kerr.
Chair, yeah, I just feel that I think that it's right that things are going in the right direction. We are getting fewer waivers of all sorts, and I think that is something to be noted and appreciated. So I just wondered if we could minute that we appreciate the work that's going on to reduce the waivers. Because I think it's probably a pretty challenging job that's going on there, and it's working. So
yeah, thanks. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, we will minute that. I'm sure Steve will minute. They put those in the minute. But yeah, if you take that recommendation, and obviously Linda's going to come back at us on waivers number 5 and 6, obviously, and then we can always follow up with her after that if everybody's okay. If anybody objects, again, if you just make a note in the comments. Otherwise, we'll take that with those 2 recommendations and move on to item 11, which will be, I think, an effort between Heather Greenan and Sarah Walker on the risk management strategy and handbook. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll kick off if that's okay. So I'm really pleased to bring to the committee the updated risk management strategy and handbook. Members of the committee that have been present for a while will remember that the last one was approved in 2018, and there's been a lot of work that's been undertaken both by members and officers to develop and embed our risk culture. So the documents that are presented today reflect the work that has taken place over the last 2 years and seek to further develop our risk culture going forward. So both documents are presented for approval. I'll cover them first and then just pick up the additional recommendation around the resolution from July. So paragraph 4.15 sets out the key changes to the risk management strategy. So in summary, what we've done is actually expand our risk matrix to reflect both threats and opportunities. I think this is a really positive development for us and shows our direction of travel in relation to risk management, seeking to both obviously mitigate any threats, but also see positive opportunities within certain risks that may be presented to us as an organisation and our services. The roles and responsibilities presented within the strategy have been reviewed and updated. There were some developments from the original publication of the 2018 edition, including the PMO and the involvement of the lead member in the corporate risk management group, reporting of our strategic risks to cabinet and subsequently executive scrutiny, and obviously the role of audit and accounts has been updated in line with the refreshed terms of reference, which has already been covered in this morning's meeting. So the roles and responsibilities have been updated to reflect where we are currently in the work that has taken place. In terms of the risk management handbook, this has actually been updated quite a bit following feedback from members of the corporate risk management group. There's more content on risk appetite, which is something we've talked about at previous meetings, to really start to understand where we're willing to take risks and obviously where we're not. There's more in there around the management of an issue versus a risk, to make sure that we've absolutely got clarity in that, and the concept of emerging risks within our framework. So these are all really positive developments, I think, that evidence the direction of travel that we're going forward with our risk management culture. There's also a section on risk assurance which has been added, which we didn't have previously, and again I think is reflective of the work that's going on to ensure that we are appropriately challenging the mitigations that are in place and the profile of risk management. Appendix 3 is a summary on a page, really. So this is about trying to make risk management accessible. A really important part of our risk culture is making sure that it's owned at all levels and there's accountability. Obviously the roles and responsibilities are reflected in the strategy. And the other part of the report, very quickly presented under paragraph 4.9, is just to ensure that we are appropriately closing the loop on the resolutions from the July meeting. So there are a couple of updates there in relation to COVID and Brexit, and also the risk that we have on the strategic risk register in relation to project management governance. In terms of next steps, if the committee are happy to approve the documents, there will be 6 monthly assurance reports coming to the committee around the effectiveness of our risk management framework, the first of which we're proposing will come in January. And obviously the strategic risks are published as part of our Q2 report to Cabinet that will go next week.
Thank you. While people are formulating questions, I've got let's see, somebody's typing a message. I think I've got Councillor Kerr. So if you want to ask your question, Councillor Kerr, and I think I've got Phil as well, who's typing a message at least. You're on mute, Councillor Kerr.
Sorry. There we go. So thank you, Sarah. I'm really inspired by this double-sized risk thing. I think that's a really nice way of doing it, and I think it balances really nicely with more talk about the risk appetite. So I'm an enthusiast for that. We have to see how it goes and how we can take it forward, but I think it's a good way of looking at that balance between opportunity and risk. What I particularly wondered, though, was whether you feel there is a difference in risk appetite between different parts of the council, and whether that is something that maybe some of the sort of review work that you're doing over the next 6 months to report back to us, maybe that is something that you might consider. That's the first point. The second point was the single page, which I just wondered there was opportunity to review there and make a little bit more emphasis on the opportunities, maybe put that into the definition at the top of the page, because otherwise it only appears at the bottom, because I think it needs to be more in your face than mentioned in passing at the bottom. And the third thing was whether there's any role and how it would be accommodated in looking at the public as a source of identification of the risks and opportunities, and how we actually learn from them who are receiving the services and experiencing the city, and how we bring them into this thinking, and whether that is something that any thought's been done on, or whether it could be done on.
Okay.
So 3 points.
Yeah, thank you. So in relation to the first point, I think that there will be variability in risk appetite, quite rightly, depending upon the services that are being delivered. But I think that's something that we need to pick up, because actually part of our developing risk culture is making sure that there's clarity in our organisational appetite and where we're willing to take risks and where we're not. So that's something that we can definitely pick up as part of the assurance reports going forward. In relation to the document on a page, I'm more than happy to make amendments to that. Thank you for the feedback, and I'm glad that the balanced approach in terms of threats and opportunities is welcomed, and obviously the format is useful. We are actually looking to pilot it currently with a new risk and strategic risk register. So I think it's just about making sure that we've got the same level of control and challenge in place, irrespective of whether we're obviously looking from a threat or an opportunity perspective. And in relation to, sorry Lucy, what was the final point again?
The public, and how we can involve the public in this thinking.
Yeah, I think that is really an important part of risk identification. The section on risk identification within our risk management handbook lists a variety of different ways through which we can identify risks, and encourages officers to do that collectively and to think as broadly as possible, because actually it's once you do that process of risk identification and analysis, it allows us to really get underneath, where we are willing to tolerate risks and where there may be emerging risks or issues. So certainly that should be present within the handbook, and if it's not explicitly there, then that's something I can pick up and amend prior to the publication internally. But we certainly should be looking at a variety of different sources, because obviously that is part of an effective framework.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks for that response, Sarah. And of course, Phil's commented as well that getting the risk management policy on a single page is well done. So I've got a number of questions. So firstly, item 4.6, Sarah. I'll give all the questions to you. Is that all right? And then you can answer them, come back and answer them. So you've got 4.6. So the fourth bullet point down around risk surgeries. It was just, if you're mainly going to sort of report back more of the quarterly things to exec scrutiny, it's so who's going to be leading on? Will there still be the opportunity for the Audit and Accounts Committee to launch risk surgeries? Will there be opportunities for maybe exec scrutiny, and when they scrutinise the cabinet, these more frequently at the cabinet, to sort of request risk surgeries on particular high risk items? So that's the first question, around some clarification on that. Then paragraph 4.11, it was just that obviously there's, originally we were supposed to get an update, I think, for Q1 and possibly Q2 as well at this meeting, but obviously that you've obviously revised that, and it's in line with our revised terms of reference as well, where we're more with the actual commenting on the risks, is the scrutiny of the risks, if you like, themselves. I think will be at exec scrutiny, which of course two of us are on anyway, but Councillor Kerr and myself. But it's what was the criteria around that? It's just that just want to make sure we've got feedback that everybody on the committee is happy with that, and we're sort of in line with what we've agreed earlier on the terms of reference, that we're more having a brief on the adequacy and the appropriateness and more around the governance idea of the whole risk management strategy itself. So those are the sort of first two questions. Then if we go, so I've got these in front of me on a screen. If we now move to the actual handbook, so if we go on to page 10, where you've got the comment scrutiny committees, does this mean that risks that fit into their portfolio will now automatically be reported to the relevant scrutiny committee as well as to exec scrutiny? So it's talking where particularly it says that review and challenge strategic risk information reported to Cabinet quarterly as part of performance monitoring report. So that's that question there. And then yeah, I'm just like Councillor Kerr, I'm interested in the overall sort of opportunity. So presumably you're updating the sort of matrix that you use for risk, whereas you're, as well as looking at the threat of each risk, you'll also look at for each risk that comes up, you'll also, the way that the relationship between these two things is you're also looking at some, as well as doing the standard mitigation and stuff of risks, you also look at each risk, an assessment of the opportunities around each risk as well as you go through that exercise. So those are two questions on the actual handbook itself. No, sorry, that's the strategy. Sorry, on the strategy itself. So I've got these in front of me and I'm just doing these in order. So the handbook then is on is the next one. Then is on final one I've got which is Appendix 2. I've got Appendix 1 open again. Sorry about this.
Would it be helpful for me to respond on a couple of the things you've raised?
Yeah, okay, you do that and I'll bring the other one up. Yes, if you do that.
Okay, so in relation to risk surgeries, if members have got a copy of the risk management handbook available to them, this is set out on pages 16 and 17 under the assurance section. Risk surgeries have been really powerful in enabling us to review and reflect on the assurances and our overall approach to assurance in relation to risk management. So I think that what we want to do is take them forward as more of a reflective activity. So where we've not managed to successfully mitigate a risk and it has become an issue, that is generally the criteria for the nomination, identification, recommendation of a risk surgery. And in terms of where that can happen, obviously it can happen through Cabinet as part of the reporting, performance reporting reports, and quite rightly so, as the reports go through executive scrutiny, there can be an appropriate recommendation for Cabinet to consider a risk surgery from executive scrutiny in a particular area, and also Audit and Accounts Committee can identify with support from the assurance team as part of the process of assuring our framework. So obviously if things go wrong, that's an opportunity for us to take a step back and review and reflect on what it is we need to learn from that, and whether it was, where the issues were in relation to the execution of our framework and handbook. So in response to your question, I think it actually widens our opportunities, Councillor Willoughby, for the identification of risk surgeries, but appropriate identification of risk surgeries. We will be continuing with deep dive reviews through the Corporate Risk Management Group, and the lead member for Finance and Procurement is a member of that group. So there is obviously Cabinet are cited of the ongoing activity from an insurance perspective as well. In terms of the second question, I think Heather was going to respond to that one, so I'll pause at that point.
Thanks, Sarah. So I think this question is just around the reporting of risks, which obviously previously Audit and Accounts Committee would have seen on a quarterly basis. If I can just say, I suppose it's, I mean, as has been discussed, what we've done is realigned responsibilities here. Because it is the responsibility of decision makers, I think, to take into account risks. So obviously they would do as part of any Cabinet paper that goes, and it's certainly considered as part of the performance report that goes quarterly. So if I'm being honest, what we were finding is actually we were duplicate reporting. We were reporting into Audit and Accounts Committee and reporting into Cabinet and Exec Scrutiny. And really what we feel, is that Audit and Accounts Committee is really about that assurance role, and that's obviously what we will be picking up in the 6 monthly assurance reports. However, obviously the risk information will continue to be reported to Cabinet and Exec Scrutiny. We're obviously happy to share those reports with all members of Audit and Accounts Committee, just so you can see, see progress.
Did you want me to respond, Councillor Willoughby, finally to the last question around scrutiny commissions? I think I've sort of responded to that as part of my previous point, but I think obviously sitting beneath the strategic risk register, there are directorate and departmental risks, and so obviously what we need to ensure is that scrutiny commissions have the opportunity to identify and review risks at a lower level as part of our overall framework, as we would with performance. So that is obviously appropriately reflected under roles and responsibilities within the strategy.
Thanks, Sarah. And it was just clarification on the risks versus opportunities as well. I asked about whether each risk was then going to have its opportunity assessed. That was the just to clarify what's going to be added into the process.
Yeah, so the process for the identification of risks in relation to being a threat and an opportunity, what we are doing currently and is presented within the detail in the handbook. So our risk registers will actually ask risk owners to evaluate best case and worst case scenarios, so that actually we fully consider the threats alongside the opportunities, and then allows us to take a balanced view on how we move forward with the treatment and mitigation of that risk. So risk opportunities are not necessarily about replacing a risk that has been identified as a threat. It's about understanding where there are opportunities that we can choose to exploit that allow us to achieve our overall organisational aims, and it's also about the narrative and how we feed that into our performance frameworks, etc. So in terms of that process, our risk registers are appropriately being updated to ensure that there is a balanced view going forward. But I think obviously as a new element of the framework, we need to make sure that we are responsive and flexible in making sure that it works. And if it doesn't work, then that will be featured as part of the assurance reports going forward, and we will make recommendations of appropriate changes. But where we've looked to pilot it currently, I think there's been really positive feedback. I think it's a real opportunity to think differently about risk management. Red risks are not always a bad thing. It might be an appropriate classification of a risk that we are willing to tolerate within our parameters. So
Steve said as chair that he's lost sound, and he was going to try leaving the meeting and coming back again. Stephen,
I'm back in.
Oh, he's back in already.
Putting my video on. I just went back in and it seems to have worked. So sorry, Sarah. Do you mind summarising again?
Basically, in response to your question, absolutely, we are updating our tools to provide a balanced view of best and worst case scenarios in relation to risk. But I think my reflection to the committee is that we need to be flexible in the implementation of it, and we will report back as part of the assurance reports where we are looking at risks as opportunities and what that means in terms of the delivery of our strategic priorities and the appropriate controls in relation to the threat. So yeah, I suppose the answer is yes, we are, but we need to make sure that the tools are under review because it's a new process.
Just to clarify on the risk surgery, does that mean that they can be, we obviously had 2 in June, so those like that, they can actually be run by other committees, or does it still have to be us as audit and accounts?
The guidance in relation to the handbook is the Cabinet and Audit and Accounts.
Oh, okay, so Cabinet can do them as well as audit.
Yeah, and Heather wanted to add in as well.
Okay, brilliant. So and then I've got the final 2 on the actual handbook, which I've actually located. It was in front of me, it was just at the bottom of the screen. So I was clicking on it and it wasn't changing the other thing. So on page 15 of the handbook, Appendix 2, you've got a comment that says, where you talk about the following review monitoring processes and frequency must be followed. So you've got project level. So I was just wondering whether these levels on project activities should also be reported to the relevant cabinet member and or scrutiny board, particularly as a result of the lessons we've learned from the A52, where sort of risks and things happening on that project weren't actually reported to members. That's one of the findings there. And then also on the risk surgery bit in there as well, on page 17, I just wondered, you talk about cabinet as well, that's where you clarify what you just said, of course. I just wondered whether we should add in scrutiny as well, a relevant scrutiny board, or the exec scrutiny board as well.
Okay, so if I take the question on the project risk registers, so they are obviously reviewed regularly by project boards, and we have an escalation process in place where, if appropriate, they are escalated onto directorate risk registers and then onto strategic risk registers. So that's how we address them. Obviously, if a project has a risk that obviously would have strategic significance, then obviously we would see that reported as part of the quarterly monitoring. Okay.
There's the final question on maybe scrutiny as well on page 17 of Appendix 2.
Okay, so I think it's not exclusively identified. Obviously, as part of scrutiny reviewing the Cabinet papers, they could make that recommendation to Cabinet that there is a need for a risk surgery. In terms of the other scrutiny commissions, we actually have quite a well-established performance surgery process, and there is obviously a lot of crossover and alignment between some of our performance monitoring activity and risk monitoring activity. So there is that opportunity for them to identify them there. But I think what we need to try and do is be proportionate and focused with regards to our risk surgery activity, very much looking at where a risk has not been effectively mitigated and has become an issue, so that we can appropriately learn from that in relation to the effectiveness of our framework and where we need to seek to make improvements going forward. So I'm happy to take any further comments from members of the committee in relation to that.
Okay, thanks. I don't know if anybody else wanted to ask any questions, because unfortunately having to come out and in again, I've lost my conversation has restarted. So do just put in again if you wanted to ask a question, since I typed in, I've got to leave because I've lost the sound. Yeah, I think that's
Councillor,
right. I hope. Sorry.
Councillor Willoughby, I wondered whether I could make a final comment, if that was okay.
Yeah, sure. I know you answered the question. Yes, certainly. Yeah.
It was just in general around the report. I just wanted to say a big thank you, actually. First of all, to Sarah Walker, who's put in some fantastic work here to update the strategy and the handbook. And, I think over the last few years, in terms of moving us forward around risk management, if I could also say that a big thank you to Audit and Accounts Committee, because actually I think it's been your role, that has really helped us move us forward over the last few years. And actually, I think, has helped us shape the strategy and the framework, and certainly develop the risk culture. But I feel we've moved on significantly over the last few years. Is there still room for improvement? Definitely. And we will continue to work on that. But, I just wanted to recognise where we were. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. My appreciation on behalf of the committee for all the work that's been done. I know this has been outstanding for some time, that we've been wanting an update on this and a chance to look at it. But it has been a sort of, a pay tribute to yourself, Heather, that compared with when I was first involved on this committee and risk to what it is now, it's been a vast improvement in the overall process and appetite to risk, and the fact that we've learned lessons from things like the A52 and stuff in terms of this. So I had our appreciation on behalf of, if you minute that, on behalf of the committee as well. And I suppose also, should Cabinet dare they even reject a recommendation from exec scrutiny for a risk surgery, I suppose there's always the option that exec scrutiny can, the chair of exec scrutiny can write to myself as chair of audit and ask us to sort of consider taking it up as well. So there is the option, I suppose, for exec scrutiny as well. And if I remember, I'll make that point at exec scrutiny next week. So if there's no other comments, if everybody's okay to take the recommendations on those on those items, and thank everybody for a good piece of work. So the items is just take the full recommendations as printed to approve the strategy and handbook and note the resolutions, and also note that we'll next get one in next get a sort of report on risk assurance in our next meeting, January 21, in line with the revised roles and responsibilities in the risk management strategy and handbook. So if there's any objections to that, just put them in the comments section. Otherwise, let's move on to the counter fraud update. And is John? Who is that?
It's me, Chair.
Brilliant. Right. Okay.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'll give apologies on behalf of John Massey. Apparently, we're going into another lockdown tomorrow, so there are one or two things he's having to address around business support grants and that type of thing. So, unfortunately, he's not able to attend. Just to run through briefly on the counter fraud update, it covers the first half year period from the 1st of April through to the 30th of September. One of the things that we are currently working on is providing information for the National Fraud Initiative. We're uploading information onto that, and we should get the matches coming through from that in late January. They are, as part of this year's National Fraud Initiative, asking for data that will enable them to do data matching around the business support grants. So the one thing they'll be able to do that we haven't done internally is match across councils, so they can see if there's any duplicate payments of grant across different councils, whereas we've only been able to look at those under data protection, only look at the information for this council. So we start reporting through on the results of the National Fraud Initiative probably hopefully at the March meeting, but more preferably at the June 21 meeting. Tracy Thomas has provided an update on the counter fraud team and the work that they've been doing from paragraph 4.4 through to paragraph 4.9. As you can see there, it's the usual things that they've been involved in, such as recovering properties and etc. And also 4.8, understanding emerging fraud risks, which is something that I'm doing quite a bit of work as well. So Tracy and I are working quite closely at the moment on looking at, what will be the fraud risks. And those are members that were at the workshop beforehand will remember me talking about how we use, risk registers, etc. One of the things that we're trying to build up is a list of fraud risks and what controls are in place within the authority to mitigate those. That's something that Audit and Counter Fraud team are currently working on. Although it's not mentioned in the report, we're also looking at the various policies, and what I'm trying to do there is look at amalgamating the counter fraud policy and the anti-bribery policy and the anti-money laundering policy into one document rather than have several documents on that. We're also looking at the whistleblowing policies and hopefully we will have reviewed those by the time for the January meeting of this committee. Public Interest Disclosure Act. We've not had any disclosures under the whistleblowing policy since the 1st of April. We've not had any suspicions of bribery since the 1st of April. We've also not had any reports of any money laundering, so things are looking good on those fronts. And then if we turn to Regulation of Investigative Powers Act, RIPA, again, there's been no recorded activity under Part 2 of the RIPA Act. So that's it in a nutshell, Chair.
Thanks, Richard, and express our appreciation and to John as well. We obviously fully understand why he wasn't able to come, what he's doing there, and preventing, as we said earlier, preventing fraud on some of these stuff around the COVID response, and do express our appreciation, and I'll say that on behalf of the committee, for all the work that he does towards this. Does anybody have any questions on this at all? Otherwise, I think it's very good work that I'll just add my comments that it's very good work that they've done. So Councillor Dinsmore. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Chair. Richard, you may not be able to answer because you're deputising for Steve, but can you indicate whether, in terms of Action Fraud, which is the National Crime Agency work, how we connect up the work we do internally in terms of fraud and the initiative that you just highlighted and outlined, and what relationship we have with Action Fraud, and of how they can advise and inform activity they know about regionally, nationally, globally to us, and vice versa, and how crimes get recorded and then prosecution processes come into effect.
I can give my side of it, Councillor Dins. I know Tracy gets a lot more involved with Action Fraud. A lot of the cases that we do, certainly if we have any anything where we suspect anti-money laundering or anything like that, we refer that through the national database, and that will get allocated to Action Fraud, who will then contact the local constabulary and pass that on to them. We do a lot of work with a number of organisations, not just Action Fraud. We've also worked quite closely with the National Anti-Fraud Network as well, and they provide us with a lot of detail. So there's quite, and I know Tracy, for example, gets involved in a number of groups of other fraud investigators that meet and stuff like that. So there's a lot of interchange of information within the law, I will say. We stick with we will consult on data protection where we need to, and we'll talk to the Council's data protection officer on any issues around that. But I mean, Tracy would probably be able to give you a lot more detail on her relationship with Action Fraud. We just tend to, from an audit point of view, we don't get as deeply involved. Although if anything does come, we do log things on the national database where we need to, and we do take note of anything that comes out of Action Fraud and the National Anti-Fraud Network as well. National Anti-Fraud Network are very, very good at sending out briefings, and they were certainly with the business support grant side of things. There was quite a few briefings came out from National Anti-Fraud Network around fictitious bank accounts and that type of stuff that we were able to use, and then do data matching to make sure that those accounts had not been used for any grant applications.
Can I just share, just to follow up, in terms of, I suppose when we are uncovering fraud to do with the council, the victim is ourselves as the corporate authority. I'm guessing, I may be wrong, but do we also have other victims as a result of what we unearth from our work, and what help and support are they offered? Is that something that I would share now, or maybe subsequently after the meeting?
It's not something I can answer at the current time, Councillor Dins. I need to talk to Tracy on her areas of work. From an internal audit point of view, we're mostly concerned with the council being the victim.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So if there's no other questions, thanks for that, Councillor Dinser. We'll just we'll note the recommendation, which is to note the actions taken and progress being made on counter-fraud activities across the council. So I presume everybody's no objections to that. Put them in the comments if you do. Otherwise, and then we'll move on to you again, Richard, which is the internal audit progress report.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, the progress report in front of you. I'll point out to you now, it is split into two. There are two areas that fall into the exempt part, and we'll pick those up at a later date, later part of the agenda. Overall, this covers the period from the 1st of July through to the 30th of September, and I am pleased with the progress that we've been making on the reports on internal audit. We are ahead of our target, which has surprised me given the difficulties we've had with COVID. So I'm pleased on that point. One of the things that I will point out to you, I'm having a bit of trouble with my other machine at the moment, which has decided to freeze on me, so I can't actually scroll down the report. But clearly the key areas that the committee are interested in are the reports that we've done and the assurance ratings we've given. As you can see from the report, there are 3 limited areas this time we report on. Although if you do look at, there is a false swingometer on the translation one, it's showing limited, but it shouldn't be. That should be a reasonable one. So unfortunately, the reports have gone, so I should just have to talk from memory on this one. But yeah, I mean, there are 3 ones that are limited. I'm not raising any concerns that I would want the committee to look at the moment. In a lot of cases, the managers are implementing recommendations as they should be, and you can see from the report that some of the recommendations have already been implemented on a lot of the reports that we're highlighting on here. However, there are still some, such as on the tribunal side of things, that where we've passed the report date, and we're still waiting on a response from management on those. But so recommendation wise, again, we are working with departments to get recommendations implemented. I've given you a breakdown in the report of those areas that I had, that are significant and are overdue, and moderate and overdue. Again, there's nothing that I would raise that you need to be concerned about at the moment. We're trying to manage those. However, if there are any that I think the committee need to take a closer look at, I will refer it through to the chair and vice chair at our monthly meetings.
Thanks, Richard. And just a couple of while anybody else is formulating any questions, just on the actual appendix, the actual report itself, page 3, we've got the dashboard. I think you said you're ahead of where we should be, so it was just really a question of how this compares with previous year's data for that period. And then on page 6, where you talk about the audit on the bus station processes and procedures. So it's around, and obviously there's the first, when you've got the summary of weaknesses, what's the overall risk to the council? What's the sort of action that's been taken to address those weaknesses that you've just highlighted there? So that's the bus shelter audit, bottom of page 6. And then the SEND needs and tribunals one, is I'm just interested, what was the sort of factor that sort of identified this audit, what drove the audit, and how long have these issues been in place? So are they sort of stuff that you found recently? How long do you think they've been issues? If you just found them obviously recently with the audit you've done, and I'd just be interested in what action is being taken to resolve those. And then finally, the recommendation tracking on page 11. Yeah, so it's again linked with you go into a bit more detail on that SEND one, where you say action due is 7, so it's about what's the status of those. So it's not linked in with my previous question, and so it's just those 3 for me. It's those three questions. Thanks.
I'm going to struggle to answer because my other machine has just completely died on me, which means I've lost all my papers for this meeting. So I'm just trying to recover various things and trying to get them up on this other machine. But as far as the bus station goes, Councillor Willoughby, the majority of issues there were around cash handling. So we have done quite a bit of work with them on that. But bear with me. Lucy sent me the link. Thank you, Lucy. But yeah, so scroll through. The first question you're asking was about the dashboard, Councillor Willoughby. Yeah, I mean, most of this is sort of the comment I was making about we're ahead of progress. Is one of the things I look at is where we are compared to our target. We have a target, a monthly target each month for where we are against audit plans across the partnership. And then we've just had the November figures come out, and we're at 50%, just over 50% for Derby City, which is very, very pleasing because it's above the target of, which is about 48%, where we expect to be at this time of year. So that's one good thing. Whether we're spending a lot of time at the moment on certain audit areas, so that's keeping us busy. But it's pleasing to know we are ahead of target. Can you just refresh your questions, please? And the second one was that about the bus shelter.
Yes, it was. Yeah, you said about the fight. You said it was around cash handling. So it's the overall risk of that to the council, and what actions are they taking to resolve that?
Yeah. One of the problems was the fact that they're not. If you take the first one, for example, there's no reconciliation. They don't know how much cash has been inserted into the turnstiles. They don't know how many people have used it. So they can't actually do a reconciliation because they don't know. And this is one of the biggest problems is that they're not following proper cash handling procedures. The council has cash handling procedures, and that's what they should be following. And that's one of the things we have been following up. As you can see, all of these are still action due. We're still waiting for information to come back from the managers on that to tell us exactly what they've done on that. And until they've done that, I'm not in a position to comment on how they've how well they've implemented things at the moment, because at the moment we don't know.
And the final one was around the SEND stuff, Richard.
Yes.
What drove the audit and what's been done to resolve them, and how long they've been? Do you think they've been issues and the latest status? Because I think it later on says that it's an action that was sort of still action due and that sort of thing on it. You look at the recommendation tracker for that.
Yeah. The reason for doing this audit was because what we basically wanted to do was provide assurance to the department following the external assessment that things they were doing were happening. And one of the things that the department came back on was saying, could you have a look at that, how we deal with tribunals and appeals? That's one of the areas that we have concerns about. And so that's the reason for doing this audit, that we picked that up and looked specifically at that area to give feedback to the department on how they are doing with meeting the various risks that they've got there. There's been some changes in the department. As you can see from the table there, they have started implementing some of the recommendations but we still are waiting feedback on those that were from the end of September. Again, I can't comment yet until I actually see the feedback from officers on that as to how well they're doing with that.
Okay, it's interesting to chase up on that one then, possibly.
Yeah, we do follow up on a monthly basis.
Okay, thanks very much. So are there any other questions at all from committee members on that at all?
So, sorry, Chair, I haven't written it in, but I'm just wondering that we're just about going into another month's lockdown, and there seem to be quite a lot of these new audits where don't seem to be getting a lot of engagement with things that should have been completed at the end of August and moving forward in September, both for this one and the bus station. And I just wondered if you have any concerns that we're going to have another month of inactivity because of the lockdown, or whether it's going to give an opportunity for people to actually address some of these things. Is there a it seems to be not moving.
I take your point, Lucy. One of the things we found the last lockdown was we got engagement from some areas but not others, and that's the key issue. We do follow everything up at director level on recommendations. So all the directors have recently, about 3 weeks ago, will have received a list of all the recommendations for their areas, and what we do there is we ask them to then come back to us with responses to all of those. So we are due to be following those up next week where we've not heard from people. So we will keep at people. What we will do as well is report through to the strategic director level as well, where we're not getting buy-in on things. So to get the strategic director to help out with buy-in. Some people are very, very good and come back to us. Others, because as well, the problem we had with the last lockdown was that a number of people were redeployed, so it was difficult getting them to yeah. I'm not sure what the situation is going to be in the next lockdown. However, we are chasing things, And if the moment I think that we're having difficulty, and we've got the strategic director involved, I will contact the chair and vice chair of committee as well and get them to perhaps think about calling.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. If we say we can do that, as we say at the calling, then obviously there's the SND thing as well. So nobody else has put in to ask a question, so we'll just take forward those three recommendations on the on item 13 and as read, and then now we come on to item 14, and then I think there has to be a pause after this. So I have to read this out, which is to consider a resolution to exclude the press and public during consideration of the following items. Under section 100A excuse me, of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following items on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So after having read that one out, if nobody's got any objections to that, I think I have to hand over to you, Steve, just to guide us through the next bit.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair.